Welcome to another edition of What Really Matters. I'm Gary Sutton. I'm with Charlie Giroux, who's running for governor, in case you don't know that by now after these 20 or so weeks that we've been doing this.
If they missed that, we're in trouble.
Yeah, so Charlie is running for the Republican nomination for governor, and we're coming down to the final days here. But speaking of today and what really matters and what people are talking about, there were two words today, and we go with two words or a word every week, and this week happens to be two, faith and life. And they kind of do go together here. Today is the National Day of Prayer as we do this particular interview, Charlie, and this was started back in 1952 by President Truman and has been followed by every president since in making that decree. But National Day of Prayer, and one of the things I guess I want to ask you this morning is, where does your faith tie into how you look at governing as a potential governor of the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, your world and life view has to be tied to your faith. They have to be inextricably linked or you're incomplete. So my faith is very much a part of who I am, part of my life, part of my thought process, etc. And let me just say, on the National Day of Prayer, as we're taping this, it won't go out today necessarily, but if ever there was a time for us to be praying for America, it's right now.
As you think about prayers for America right now, what kind of sits at the top of your list? What things do we need in America that we don't have right now that we could maybe ask the Almighty for?
Well, I think there are two things. We need God's forgiveness and we need His blessing.
Mm-hmm. So many times we look at prayer and we think about prayer in terms of humbleness. And one of the things that I worry about with prayer is that we've lost a sense of humbleness and service in our country. You and I have talked about this briefly before, but talk about the idea of humbleness and service. A lot of people would say they don't go together. I would offer that they go together very well, and I know you've been talking about that a lot in the trail.
Well, they do link up. I mean, humility and the ability to be a servant leader are tied together in ways that are pretty obvious, but there are also some less obvious ways, Gary, because in order to be a truly effective leader, it's not bossing people around, it's not telling them, it's showing them the way, it's leading, it's allowing people to see their potential, the best for them, their families, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, and allowing a way to get there. And so I think that having a certain sense of humility and being a servant leader is the best way to lead a small organization like the company where I work or a large state like Pennsylvania.
We look at a lot of the battles that are going on between faith and state in this country today. And a lot of people say, well, Thomas Jefferson said separation of church and state, which he kind of alluded to in a letter to the Danbury Baptist. But one of the things that people forget about is he didn't talk about a divorce between religion and state. And he also didn't talk about the idea of losing your rights when you came to the door in religion and state. He had a respect for religion. And I think people miss that point of view that, that we have to have a respect for religion in what we do in terms of our state happenings.
Well, there was no question that the founders did not want a state church in the United States.
Right.
They had one in England, and they didn't like that. But they never, ever suggested that religion and faith be divorced from the public square. In fact, if you read the whole of the founders' thoughts and opinions, they wanted religion, faith to be very much a part of the public square, and they believed that from those values sprang all of the virtues that were so important to government.
It's interesting today how we've lost sight of that, and it's almost like we don't want to have any kind of religious or spiritual underpinnings in our country. And if we take those away, then pretty much anything goes, right?
No, it really does. I mean, without true faith, virtue, and the things that we consider to be religion, the public domain collapses.
I know one of your guys that you work for and have great admiration for, Ronald Reagan, talked about us getting back to being a city on the hill. And the idea that many of the Puritans had, that we come here and be an example to others. Are we still an example to others here in this country? Have we lost our ability to do that?
I think we are, Gary. We have always been the last great hope of mankind. We have to continue to be that. That's something that requires effort on all of our parts every single day. Those things don't just happen. To be the shining city on a hill, to be the beacon of light in a world of darkness, requires a little bit of something from every citizen every day. That's not just from the president or the governor or those in authority and leadership. It comes from all of us every single day.
A figurative grenade got thrown into the oatmeal room this week as we moved into life. Obviously, the decision on Roe v. Wade appears like it's been made. We have a little advanced preview, something we've not seen before with that leak. And yet at the same time, it appears they're going to overturn that, which would then send it back to the states. Obviously, in the state of Pennsylvania, our governor has come out and said all kinds of things about how he will veto any anti-choice things that come to his desk. How does Charlie Giroux treat it if that, in fact, does come to pass and Roe v. Wade is returned to the states?
First of all, Gary, I'm hoping and praying that the leak that came out this week, and look, a lot of our friends on the right side of the aisle are moaning and complaining about the leak, and the leak was obviously wrong, and whoever did it ought to be prosecuted. But let's look past the leak.
Right.
Let's look at what came, and I'm just so hopeful and prayerful that it is, in fact, the final opinion of the court, because if it is, it allows us for the first time in over 50 years to reverse the trends of Roe versus Wade, where we've had more than 60 million unborn children aborted in this country. When you think about that, Gary, that's the population of every state surrounding Pennsylvania, with the exception of New York, combined. That's Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, combined, that we've lost to abortion. And you've got Josh Shapiro and some others like Tom Wolfe saying that abortion is health care, and that we ought to be able to have a situation where you could get an abortion at any time, for any reason, and have the taxpayers pay for it. So I know that most Pennsylvanians don't agree with that most Pennsylvanians would like to see us put reasonable protections in place to safeguard the unborn and women. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity as governor to work with the General Assembly to build consensus to provide the most protection for our unborn children as we possibly can. And that's where I'll be as governor. Thankfully, Tom Wolfe is not going to be in office by the time any of this would actually start to happen. So his threat of a veto pen is, really yelling in an empty can.
Governor Wolfe said the other day that it's going to hurt our future. And I was thinking to myself, over the 50 years, how many futures has he hurt, or have we hurt in this country by the 60 million plus the children who've been killed? You think about this, 3,000 people a day, their lives were ended over a 50-year period. That's the same as having like 50 years of 9/11s every day. It's incredible, and yet we kind of go by it with a wink and a nod and say, well, we got a disposable world now. It wasn't convenient. A lot of people aren't ready to go along with that idea.
It's gut-wrenching, Gary. It really is. And the rhetoric that comes out of Tom Wolfe's mouth is really astounding.
It's incredible.
And he ought to be ashamed of himself, but I'll leave the lecturing to him for others. But the whole notion that he and Josh Shapiro have, that we ought to have more abortions, is something that's rejected by the vast majority of Pennsylvanians. Right. I mean, even those that consider themselves, quote-unquote, pro-choice, have said consistently that we ought to have abortion safe, legal, and rare. Tom Wolfe and Josh Shapiro do not think that abortion ought to be rare. They somehow have this incredibly misguided notion that if we have more abortions, we're better off for it. That's not a position that's held but by a very, very infinitesimal percentage of the population of Pennsylvania.
When you look back at the Roe v. Wade decision back in 1972, what was fascinating about that, they went to the 14th Amendment. And of course, the 14th Amendment was part of 3 amendments that were used to give rights to people who had been enslaved in this country. And too late, by the way, but at least we got there, 13, 14, and 15. But one of the things they do in the 14th Amendment, it's the only place that we really kind of talk about what citizenship actually is in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights. And it says that no state can enforce any law that deprives a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. And I was thinking about that. I can't think of a better way to make the case for not having an abortion than that. Right. But again, we divide it into viability, non-viability. We do all these things to contrive and rationalize. And that's where we've gotten to today. That's the argument that that's not a person in progress. That's a thing called, what's the word for it? And I'm losing it right here. But anyway, it's just a piece of flesh. It's horrible to think that's the conversation we've been having for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, you use the
fetus.
That's the word that they use because that somehow dehumanizes that unborn baby.
Right.
But just coming back to the numbers here, the staggering numbers of unborn children that have been taken, I think that we have a great opportunity now, because of what the Supreme Court is poised to do, to reverse that and to stand up for life, and I'm excited about that.
When you go back to what the present governor said, the idea that we're hurting our future, what has hurt the future more than take 60 million people out of it?
Yeah, no, I just don't even understand where he comes up with that rhetoric. I really don't. I mean, it's staggering to me, but Tom Wolfe has been since before he became governor, a radical, and I use that word advisedly, a radical pro-abortion activist. I mean, he was out escorting women into Planned Parenthood facilities and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, he's a true radical on this issue. He tried to hide that while he was running for office, but he's clearly shown his hand. Josh Shapiro, doesn't make any bones about it. He is a radical, and he, every day, I mean, literally every day, is out sending out pronouncements in the internet about how important it is to fund his campaign if you believe that you should have an abortion at any time for any reason.
You know, I was looking at some of the people who were then saying, well, if they take this away, they're going to take away other civil rights. I thought to myself, what other civil rights do we have in our country where you have the right to end a life? We don't have any.
No, in fact, on the contrary. I mean, we have defended life at every stage after birth, and if you take a life after birth, you're going to go to jail or to the death chamber. I mean, that's I have a hard time comprehending some of the rhetoric on the far left. I really do.
I do too, and I think we've gotten to a point in our country where people say, well, it's her body, her choice. I say, okay, well, let's go back to COVID. It's your body, your choice to have a mask, to have a shot. And people say, well, you know, but that affects other people. Well, doesn't it affect other people when you eliminate 60 million people from the population? Doesn't it affect other people when you take away, you put in welfare situations and so forth? When you take away those lives, it affects our nation a lot. We just don't see it right now because we've eliminated them off the map. It's kind of a weird kind of reasoning. But if it's our body, our choice, that it goes across the board, doesn't it?
It does, Gary. And I mean, there are a whole lot of ramifications to this that we could go over and over and over again, including the fact that we've got a workforce problem in many parts of the country now because we haven't had the population that we would otherwise have had. But I don't want to veer off on those tangents. I want to just stay focused on the fact that we have before us now a real opportunity, and I think a blessing with the chance to reform our laws here in Pennsylvania, and I think we will, to provide significantly more protection to unborn babies.
Lastly, for this segment, and specifically, as governor, what would you like to see? Because now, if Roe v. Wade becomes no longer the law of the land, then what happens? It goes back to the states and we say, okay, it's illegal to have an abortion, let's say. What do we do? Do we have the abortion police going out? People are uncomfortable with a lot of that kind of stuff.
Gary, we want to run down those paths immediately. I think we've got to have a very deliberative, collaborative conversation with the elected representatives of the people in the General Assembly and allow them to come up with legislation that protects, protects to the greatest extent possible the unborn babies and unborn children.
We're going to be talking a lot more about that in coming days, I'm sure, as you talk about around the country here. A big decision that's going to be coming down in July now, probably officially, but at least for unofficially, everyone's out there talking about it. Maybe you'd like to talk to Charlie about it too. You can call him at 717-877-8194. That's his cell phone number. And no, I'm not cheating on him. He'll tell you that as well all the time. He wants to have a conversation with you. We're starting to close in on the May 17th primary election, and it's time to get serious, if you're not already there, about the choices that you have. You've heard him talk about it at length. Maybe you'd like to talk about it with him. I'm Gary Sutton. What really matters, we're with Charlie Giroux. He's running for governor here in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll see you next time.
Businessman, conservative, patriot, Charlie Giroux for governor.